Hello, everybody. It's Mike here, and on the line with me, I have Della from Digitaria and the Internet Foundation to discuss a pretty interesting project. So, welcome, Della. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm very well indeed. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I remember discussing this project with you. Must have been what 2 months ago or so.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So the moment I just sat down and listened to what you had to say, I was immediately intrigued because of the technical background, and it's a very interesting approach. So, would you like to kind of give a background about the organization and what you guys are doing?
Sure, absolutely. So, the Internet Foundation, we founded in 2013 as an NGO to work on basically three things. One, a universal declaration of digital rights as an extension of human rights. Second thing, what we call our Clean Data Charter, which is a framework for how companies should use consumer personal data in a responsible and sustainable manner. And then the third thing, empowering people to be able to use their data to enrich their lives. And this basically had come about from work that we had started around about 2008, 2009, looking at personal data and really looking at the challenge of how can we have more personalized experiences of the internet. And essentially, the more we looked at this, the more we realized that there were pretty fundamental issues around privacy, consent, right to assembly, right to property that were involved in the matter. So
Right.
we had started working and piloting and looking at security and secure comms, particularly, and protecting people's digital footprint. And then eventually we realized that we needed to set up two different entities, one which could enable us to explore these things from a macro social political context, and another which enabled us to look at it more from a pure technology and even commercial perspective. So we set up the Internet Foundation to be an NGO in to lead the advocacy arm, and then we focused Digitaria on technology, innovation, and commercial realization in the space.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So, why don't we go over? I don't want to kind of take your presentation away, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So can we go over to the next slide?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
So I mean, this is a very well touted phrase that data is the new oil, is the oil of the 21st century, and that's very true.
Mhm.
But and the World Economic Forum and the Boston Consulting Group a couple of years back now estimated that the value of personal data would be €1 trillion in Europe alone by 2020.
Right.
But we very much think that that's true, but there are some very massive systemic challenges around the data economy at the moment, echoed by things like privacy consent. There's quality issues with, ad blocking and ad bots, and there's this massive crisis of trust around it.
Mhm.
And invariably, regulation has now had to step in, 2018 being a landmark year with the arrival of GDPR on one hand, PSD2 as well, which is leading to this decaying value proposition around the approaches that we've had to data today, and more importantly, a massive sustainability issue in terms of the model for the big data model, or creating these massive data lakes or data oceans as they're becoming, are becoming sort of unsustainable.
Right, right. It's coming to a point where it's pretty much a crisis for any organization that holds a large amount of data in terms of compliance and maintaining business partnerships. I mean, what happens if an organization is caught selling dirty data, whether they know or don't know about that? You know, it's
Absolutely.
not good for their business. Okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is a thing, and there's so there is this crisis in that you're touching on a really poignant point. And I suppose this next slide really, really does is our sort of epitome of this crisis. You know, there is this crisis emerging around dirty data and the advertising-led web, the advertising-led internet. But the interesting thing about this is that, you know, the giants of advertising are not Google and Facebook. They're Unilever and Procter and Gamble and automotive companies. And these companies cannot afford the reputational damage that comes from the dirty data economy. This is precisely why we think it's such a massive sustainability issue.
Right.
And even furthermore, the economics of an environment which is dominated by two or three players is unfavorable commercially to them. So there really is a storm that's brewing around this. And, you know, it's becoming bigger than commerce now, as we've seen in the recent US political presidential election, where this fake news crisis comes. So we think that there's really, you know, there is a fundamental conflict of interest in the business model of the data service providers, the information service providers that are the giants of the current data economy or digital economy, and the service that they provide, because you very much do have this extreme pendulum of the exploitation of data. Now, when the big issue here is that when you have companies like Google and Facebook that are responsible for providing us with information, search information, or sharing information, our ability to trust in that information and believe in that information is totally questionable when the commercial imperatives of the provisioning of that information is based on advertising.
Right, right. And what's really interesting about this is I think that there will be more events with issues with data leaking, hacks, or maybe some fraudulent issues, and it will be that big. It will be as big as like the too big to fail type of situation that happened with banks. I mean, you can't absolutely do away with a major auto producing company or fine them significantly. So, I mean, that's going to impact the economy. So what do you do is really the question.
Absolutely, I think you're spot on, and this is the essence of our perspective in many regards, that data in itself is becoming a fundamentally valuable asset class, and as that increasingly becomes the case, then violations, the way we handle this data and the way that this data is managed will become as sensitive and important as the way we handle money.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. So when there are infractions in this kind of manner, what happens when, core infrastructure or, I mean, Equifax is the classic example. There's nothing more poignant. I mean, half of the US's population are exposed to identity theft, not only for the rest of their lives, and this is the killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pun intended. But, the identity crime is the single crime that that is most likely to happen to you after you actually die. Wow. So, for in perpetuity, these people, half of the US's population are exposed to identity theft beyond their lives.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So yeah, so I think but for us, that by the same token, there is a big debate that okay, these guys are providing free services, and you hear this narrative quite often that they are providing value, they are providing services, and so is it really fair to say that that it's completely manipulative and that it's not a fair exchange? And, for us, there is very much this pendulum of, there's a point where it definitely becomes exploitation and manipulation. And by the same token, on the other side, there is a service in being able to find things and being guided in a sense. And for us, quintessentially, this is a matter of personal preference in terms of where the line is between these two dynamics. And so we believe, like, and this comes back to these fundamental human rights issues, it's our ability to choose where that line exists for us. That is the critical thing. We need to be able to exercise that, to be able to exercise freedom,
Right.
and to be able to have free will and free choice effectively.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
So, for us, this is really central to the work that we're doing with the Internet Foundation now. And as I say, we have we're focused currently, and particularly in terms of what we're doing in the crypto space, is on this second tier of the responsible use of data in commerce. And so we are working with the British Standards Institute to create what is being now referred to as an ethical data standard, um, which is really a means of providing guidance, a self-regulatory framework for how businesses should use personal data in an ethical way. And fundamentally, we set up what we call a Clean Data Charter a couple of years ago as a guiding principle around how data should be used responsibly. And ultimately, it's underpinned by these three pillars of privacy, ownership, and consent. And in the work that we've been doing, in the roundtable discussions that we've been having with the British Standards Institute, what became clear is that, well, privacy and consent are being addressed, not 100%, but pretty well addressed by things like GDPR, particularly. But what is missing in the narrative very much at the moment is the principle of ownership. And for us, this again ties back to a fundamental human right of the right to property. So for us, really, the ethical data standard is really about understanding and recognizing personal data as personal property and enabling people to use ownership rights across that appropriately.
Yeah, that's very interesting because it's hard for I think the average person to understand how that might look or how that ownership might actually impact their personal lives in the future. It's even a little bit unclear for me because it's going to be such a hard management problem. I mean, don't you think, just to manage your own data?
So, I mean, therein lies the heart of the challenge.
Hmm.
It can be, and this is really where we must innovate and use the best of technology. So, using AI, using machine learning, using experience design, using design thinking, and these processes to really make it intuitive and simple. Um, there's a lot of there's a lot invested in making the navigation, perception, and ownership of data extremely complex and convoluted and cumbersome. But with the right incentives, we can simplify it. It's funny. This morning, I was thinking just in the build up, and I'll show you this very shortly. For us, what we've done, we've created this data object that makes it very tangible, that makes data ownership very tangible. And there effectively are two dimensions from the user experience perspective to this. And we'll come on to that very
Okay.
shortly. But, it's basically taken us a decade to get to something so simple. And it will make more sense when we come to it,
Okay.
it in a moment.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that is the challenge for us as technologists and innovators, to make it simple and easy and convenient for people to use. It cannot be a high cognitive load on people.
Right. Right. Okay. Makes sense.
So yeah, and I mean, but the other thing that I think is very important here is that we do need to look at this from a global perspective. Um, we need a standard model that it can become the gold standard for how data is used. And I think very much where we are in the personal data landscape is where ecology and carbon pollution was about 20 years ago. And that's really the essence of why we use this message of clean data. We see it analogous to clean energy, and we believe we're creating a framework that enables us to create a clean energy ecosystem analogous to clean energy. And as I say, we've been working in this space for a while, developed a few products historically to build out this proposition. But the fundamental pillars of this framework of clean data, as we call it, is privacy by design. And being able to actually deliver much richer data by way of having very granular informed consent. By being ethically compliant, we can build trust, and by sharing value mutually and equitably across the system, we establish something that's a lot more sustainable.
Okay, makes sense. So what you're referring to is if somebody like the consent portion, for example, if somebody wants their or if an organization wants to use somebody's data, they have to have a specific request for that specific piece of data with a specific consent, right?
Absolutely. And in many ways, GDPR calls for this,
Hmm.
informed granular consent, but it doesn't really kind of give an instruction of exactly how that's realized. But
Right.
yes, absolutely, it's about informed granular consent. Now, again, that could become a user experience nightmare in many regards, right?
Yeah.
So, and for us, this is really a part of the challenge. How do we enable that in a way that gives people absolute control, but also absolute convenience? And in tests that we have run with user groups, where we have taken our proposition and run it in pilots, we've learned a lot of things around this, and certainly I think what's clear is that what's needed is a means that can be very passive, where people can just basically have no very very low levels of engagement with a system that enables this. But by the same token, the system needs to enable people to be able to deep dive if they want to, and configure and calibrate according to what they want to do. And that's no small challenge, but I think we've been able to achieve something that enables that.
Right. That's great. I know where you're going. So it's a little hard for me to comment, but um,
Yeah,
go, go ahead.
sure. So, I mean, our fundamental sort of proposition, ICO proposition, is that, we have this world of a crypto economy, if you will, which is really about data and money. And while crypto money is being well defined, and we have the ERC20 protocol, and we have obviously the raging, well, the turbulent success of Bitcoin and cryptos. But I think as an asset class, it's in full swing at the moment. But in our view, the crypto economy and is twofold, and money is one side of that, and data is the other.
Right.
So essentially, in order for people to be able to exercise ownership rights over their data, we need to be able to treat it in a similar way to how we treat money. And this is effectively what's led us to create what we call metapods and the Metapod protocol. And this is essentially a way to create crypto assets that enable data to be encapsulated and owned in a similar way to crypto tokens.
Right, right. So this is the part where it gets really, really interesting. So when I'm just explaining for the audience that when Della says protocol and encapsulation, what that means is that at a actual level of when the signals are put into protocols on these computing devices within data centers and things like that, they're actually framed into a very specific sort of standardized technology model. And a comparison to this would be the way that your basic internet connectivity was established in a similar sort of way, not exactly with the same goal intended, but with a similar, I guess, result in terms of what was developed in the technology world, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
okay, all right,
Yeah, and I think, and this is something that we've learned, and we'll come on to this a little bit later, that your analogy is not so far off actually, because by creating these crypto information assets in a universal, standardized manner that can be processed consistently, what we enable is a connectivity and interoperability of data directly between individuals and organizations or service providers. So,
right,
for us, in many ways, when we look at the Web 3.0 framework, we believe that the next evolution of the web, and this is kind of central to the proposition of decentralization, is, is that it's not really about locking people into walled gardens.
right,
Now, it's really about enabling people to interact with assets and for assets to be able to interact with people directly,
right, right.
regardless of what environment they find themselves in.
Okay,
So by creating this interoperability in the same way with money, we exchange, that's the power of it, that we're able to take currency and spend it, you know, within the sovereign realms of that money. But also when we go to different places, we can simply transfer it into another form, into the local currency, and be able to use it. It's interchangeable, and because there's this common framework and method and approach towards managing it, it means that we can move around the world.
right.
And in many senses, this is a similar kind of thing that we're doing with data in cyberspace.
Okay, so let me ask you: are you kind of suggesting or referring to the fact that there's not really an official data marketplace, and that the data is basically held in a centralized manner, and it can't freely move around as we decide? Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
So, and it's an interesting one because, there's a big issue with interoperability. So basically what's happening at the moment is that we're getting these walled gardens. So the big digital giants are creating these massive sort of data oceans, and they're becoming increasingly walled off. Now, the really interesting thing is that as AI starts to evolve, the key to successful AI development and AI evolution is access to massive data sets. So that's great on one hand, but in a competitive landscape, what's happening now is that these entities are all creating their own walled gardens and using those walled gardens to accelerate the development of their own AIs.
Right,
And this is good and bad. And what's I think happening, this is starting to be mirrored in the blockchain world in many regards as well, where we've got all of these different blockchain protocols that are effectively becoming walled gardens again.
right,
Now, as the interesting thing is that it's a complicated space because I believe that these blockchain frameworks are going to essentially become the foundations of neural networks for AIs in many regards. And I don't think it's far off to say that, big corporations like Google, Facebook, IBM even, will eventually, their AIs will eventually become the primary interface with those organizations. And even legally, organizations are set up to be individuals in a sense. So when you bring intelligence and data to that, then you effectively start to get an individualized AI emerging from these. And there's a race very much to create these at the moment. But by the same token, I think there is what we don't really want, I mean, as decentralists, what we don't really want is one universal network that is a single entity AI effectively. We need a diversity of minds in that regards.
Right.
So in many ways, I think it's important to maintain individual blockchain protocols that are industry specific and targeted to specific use cases. But what we do need is interoperability of the assets that flow between these. And this is essentially what we think MPods, as we call Metapods for short, are uniquely positioned to do.
Okay. Makes sense to me. Good.
So I'll just move on.
Okay.
So, and that really comes back to, I think when we look at the evolution of the space, I think the blockchain distributed ledger technology essentially has brought us immutable ledgers, immutable networks effectively, and then smart contracts, which Ethereum obviously brought to the spaces, brought an immutable executability to those networks. And this is two really fundamentally important innovations. We believe that Metapods allow us to put this immutable intelligence into the assets that flow over these networks. And by doing that, we're able to separate the intelligence in the assets from the intelligence of the network. And we create a kind of twins, a twin smart contract framework that enables both of those to talk to each other, enabling information to flow.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'll just ask my questions in a bit because
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So how does cheated a little bit?
Sure. Of course, I know we've been talking about this for a little bit, so you understand. So I guess the how this works primarily. What MPods fundamentally do is we pull in data, and this comes back to your earlier question about data management. So first thing we do is we pull in data from various sources, and we pull this into a centralized data vault. It's actually decentralized, so we use IPFS, distributed file storage, and IPDB to do this. But logically, it's a single place for people to navigate their data. But the most important thing is that we atomize this data. So we break the data down into its kind of core individual components. And then we reorganize it within our meta vault or data vault in a way that people can easily navigate and find it. And then the key thing that we do is we then extract individual data sets and repackage them into these MPods based on business needs, based on intentions declared by either the data owner, the user, or by a data seeker entity, which typically would be an enterprise, a brand, or a service provider.
Right. So let's say you had two different types of data. One was very sensitive, maybe some very, very personal and private information, and one that is kind of general information about you. Those would be two different types of classifications, for example, right?
Exactly.
And they could be managed independently of each other.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is the fundamental thing. So when we atomize data, every record has two things associated with it: a source, where did it come from, and a classification. And we classify data in a RAG status, so red, amber, green. If it's green, it means that it's not it cannot be used to identify you in and of itself alone. It cannot be used to identify you. If it's amber, it means that it is a personally identifiable piece of information, and if it is red, it is a confidential piece of information. Okay. So each record is classified in that manner. And then each MPod is also classified exactly in that manner, according to how identifiable the information in it makes you, and and also it then has a score for sensitivity. And I'll come back to that in a little bit.
Okay.
But essentially, the core. What we have. What is an MPod itself? Well, at core, it's this information asset, which is so when we talk about this, we talk about an atomic approach to data management, and this space is becoming buoyant and what's the word I'm looking for? Very popular among particularly a lot of crypto and DLT companies at the moment. And but we think we're fundamentally different in our approach to this space because of what we call an atomic approach. And essentially, most all the other solutions on the marketplace effectively approach data from a compound perspective. And not to labor the point too much, but essentially what that means is, I mean, if you look at, usually there are point solutions which are specifically targeted towards a specific challenge like KYC or advertising or attention or key management, for example. And these are all particularly relevant and important services, but they're very point orientated solutions. So they're very narrowly focused. And while they're very important as part of the ecosystem, they're not able to provide a kind of foundational approach towards data management.
Right.
And the other type of solution is what we call pipe solutions. And pipe solutions really focus on managing the flow of data. So, for example, they will enable you to share your social media data or data from wearables or from connected IoT devices in a secure way, but generally speaking, their commercial model is to anonymize that data and make it available to third parties with your consent. But the problem with that is that the value of the data decays dramatically when you anonymize it. And while you need to be able to share data anonymously, and certainly the majority of sort of early engagement interactions can be done anonymously, but as the value of data increases by how identifiable and distinct an individual is. So this comes to this thing, what we call fungible and it's fungible and non-fungible tokens. Crypto tokens are all pretty much fungible, so they're all the same. But MPODs are fundamentally at core non-fungible. So their value, and it's the value of personal data increases the more individual and unique it is in that regard.
Okay.
But essentially, so, by looking at data in this atomic manner, we're able to create what we believe are effectively like data molecules. And that's what these MPODs are. They're really classes of data that are unique, that can be used to address particular business needs.
Right. Right. I'd like to draw people's attention to this blue box on the right hand side,
Yes.
because it's going to be important in a moment. So I'll let you continue, Dela.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and very, very good point. So when you look at, and this is really what makes MPODs complete. So at the core asset level, you've got the combined, atomized individually or repackaged grouping of information assets.
Right.
So that's the crown jewels, effectively. But then around that, you then have a meta layer, and there's encryption between each of these layers, which can vary according to the classification of the metapod itself. But but the key thing is that you have this meta layer, and this meta layer now enables you to describe this data in a consistent, universal way so that you can manage it without necessarily accessing the contents of it. So the analogy I often use is, if you think about, if we created an MPOD of our driving licenses, you and I, we could basically put both of our driving licenses into different MPODs. And we could say, well, okay, this is a driving license, so it's owned by an individual. It's a direct ownership. It's not a parent-child. It's a parent or a direct owner. It originates from a government authority, but it is owned by an individual. It is highly confidential because it includes personal details, address information, age, unique identifiers. It's very reliable. It's got a high veracity. It's quite sensitive because of this personal information. It's an identifiable asset class. We can ascribe a value to it based on the context in which it is being interrogated. And this is an important part because the nature of an entity requesting information changes the value of the information.
Right.
If I'm being asked by, stupidly by a nightclub to provide my driving license, as to verify my age to enter a club, that's the value of that is one thing. If I'm being asked by an insurer to provide my driving license, then the value of that is completely different in that regards.
Okay.
So the context and the entity inquiring informs the value of the MPOD as well as the nature of the information that's in it, etc. And then, is it a static or is it something that's likely to change? And then you can then have access rules. You can then, there's within this meta layer, we're able to put bespoke, it do standard or bespoke rules as well. And that's really important because that then connects with the outer layer, which is the contract layer.
Right.
And this contract layer is effectively the smart contract layer, where we can program this MPOD to behave in particular ways. So, for example, we could say that, this MPOD, based on the rules around it and the classification of the information, if this MPOD encounters an app or a DApp or a network or a blockchain environment, it can ask that environment for certain credentials and to reveal how it's going to manage the MPOD. And if the network or application or entity that it is encountering doesn't comply, then it can completely lock, not give access to the meta layer even of the MPOD. Right. So this is where we start to get to really intelligent information assets.
Right, and so varying types of policies, possibly from let's say different organizations, would handle this differently and without any major fundamental changes or agreements between themselves, just based on the framework that you guys developed here, right?
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing. The MPOD protocol creates a standardized framework so we can say if an MPOD is confidential, then there's a fundamental, foundational approach. It needs to be handled in this way as standard. And then, so then it makes it very easy. It becomes completely decentralized and it enables an ecosystem to effectively flourish. We can manage data, information assets universally.
Right. And to be honest, this is the part where I get really excited about something like this because I could see large organizations eventually adopting a model like this because it has low, like once you set it up internally, it has low administration overhead and it's relatively straightforward and allows their IT to have pretty much very high levels of control around how they handle their data. And also because it's encrypted multiple times, it kind of protects them from a lot of liability that could potentially result from data leakage or any other potential issue. And this is a massive problem. And also it falls right in line with IT strategists that work at major companies. This is something that I could see somebody being interested in from a product perspective to assist with their organization.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And that's it. You hit the nail completely on the head. It enables organizations to manage data in a universal, consistent manner that the IT organization can get behind completely, that the business organization can understand, and also and automate. And with full transparency, with full auditable controls, because it's based on blockchain technology underpinning it in the background. So this enables a high degree of complex automation across complex networks with very rich information assets as well.
Right.
And this is unprecedented.
Yeah. It's amazing. I get geeked out over this because this is like the creation of protocols that created the internet, basically. So it.
Yeah, thank you. And that's our dream and vision, that it becomes a fundamental uh, means through which we effectively granularize the internet. We granularize data across the internet, but manage it to enable it to be owned and to flow and to automate and to interact. And just, it's back to this atomic framework again.
Mhm.
It's through the understanding of atoms that we got molecules in chemistry, and the whole world changed completely as a result of that. We're able to do, we're able to do materials engineering, which changed electrification, which created plastics, which changed architecture, which changed agriculture, everything. So, without getting too sort of grandiose about it, but we do think that as a framework, it enables the internet to evolve and grow in a very in a completely new manner.
Okay. All right.
So now, so this is back to the other side of it now. So we just spoke about the advantages of this from a IT enterprise perspective, but the other side of it is that from a user perspective, it's really simple. And this is the point I was making earlier, that it took us a decade to get to this level of simplicity. But, essentially from a user perspective, in order to engage or understand or interact with an MPod, all a user at the highest level, all a user needs to understand are two things. One is the color coding, so this RAG status, as in how identifiable does this information group make me? And the second thing is this sensitivity score. And that is essentially a score that is based on how sensitive the information contained within it is. And by this simple two-dimensional framework, value is ascribed to the endpoint. So based on how identifiable it is and how sensitive the information is, its value increases. Again, depending on the context and of the entity that's requesting it. So yeah, as I described earlier.
Right.
So to get to a point whereby, and people do make data out to be a very complicated space, and in many regards it is, but just through these two axes, people can utilize these and understand and engage these MPODs in a completely universal way.
Right. It really breaks it down in a very simplistic manner, which is something I can appreciate. Um, and I think you're getting to the point of valuing the data based on these the scores, right?
Exactly,
Oh, okay.
exactly. So, exactly, and so the idea, our fundamental, effectively, there's two elements to our ecosystem, if you will. There's MetaMe, which is the application that enables people to create MPODs and manage their data, and it has a personalized AI framework in it. And then there's the MetaMart, which is our marketplace, where this data can then be traded between individuals and organizations.
Okay.
So it's basically a two-sided marketplace where businesses are able to pay people for their data in the way of MPODs. And so all people need to understand to operate in that marketplace is how identifiable is the information, how sensitive is the information, and therefore value is ascribed to it based on those factors.
Okay. But like let me just try to give an example. One business entity that's trying to sell data would know exactly the validity of that data, and they would know that it has some worth or not, and I guess both parties would be able to see that, which would prevent the kind of fraud that goes on with selling that
Absolutely.
dirty data that you mentioned before, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And in it, and the important thing about this as well is that this can be done dynamically. So, the value, if you look at something like mobility, for example,
Hmm.
and the auto space, the value of data kind of decays to zero after an hour
Wow.
of many data sets. So, the ability to be able, the more real time it is and the more immediate, then the more valuable it is to the mobility ecosystem. So this changing context and it is really key. And this is for us is a fundamental part of this framework. When you look at crypto money, fungible tokens versus MPODs, non-fungible um, crypto assets, it is this non-fungibility, this ability for the asset to be able to be different and to change and evolve that, and to be able to automate and manage that is something that we haven't seen before.
Right. Okay.
So, in many ways, how they work, and this diagram that's not the best way of explaining it, but it's the best we were able to come up with so far. Effectively, we describe them as having sort of male and female smart contracts. So, effectively, the MPOD contains a smart contract component. And the idea is that the network, so the distributed ledger network, the blockchain, also contains a smart contract component. So, in this way, MPODs can exist outside of any network and can just be stored in distributed file storage across the net. And because they're encrypted, they're secure. And then when they come into contact with a DApp or a network, there is that network if it has the MPOD protocol enabled, then the MPOD and the network are able to communicate, do a handshake, and then data can flow accordingly.
Right. So this can really transfer over to any network at any time.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That
It's
that's I mean I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but this is the part that's very very interesting to me because this means that you know policies can be totally different for any entity and they can do whatever they want when it comes to data management and handle that in whatever way they see fit without having to agree between each other, which is it's a huge deal. And I don't think people really understand, but it is a huge, huge deal. And this is the thing; it just gets so interesting and exciting. So, go ahead.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest with you, we could actually just run this whole project just on this basis, and it would be completely disruptive because there is nothing really in the blockchain or DLT or crypto space that's addressing interoperability in this way. And it is such a fundamental thing because I completely agree with you. I think it is important that blockchains remain very focused and very specific to industries, verticals, particular processes, or particular problem areas, particularly as the AI becomes more involved with this. And it's another classic diversity issue. We need diversity of blockchains, we need diversity of networks in order to have a rich ecosystem. But we also need the interoperability of the assets. And by way of having this twin smart contract framework, which is a very easy thing for a network to employ. It's as easy as, ERC20 for any Ethereum, but even it's completely chain agnostic. So effectively, any network could do, any blockchain could do a soft fork and integrate the MPOD protocol, and as such be able to process MPOD assets ubiquitously. So, I mean, and effectively, so crypto coins is our token, and the idea is that in our network, transactions are done for crypto coins. So in our marketplace, brands, businesses pay individuals for their data with crypto coins. And I said before that we could effectively run focus this ICO on the interoperability, but for us, it comes back to our primary mandate, the Internet Foundation, digital human rights and empowering people with their data. We believe this foundational piece of the bottom of the pyramid effectively is the key one, is the critical one. And when you look at data, we are generating the biggest amounts of data, and it's our data sovereignty that is essentially the essential thing to crack. So crypto coins is basically designed to be a token that enables us as individuals to interact with our data and marketplace. So it's a very human centric crypto token in that regard.
Right, right. So this is basically going to be required for when you want to manage the data in any way.
Exactly.
Okay.
Certainly in our marketplace. Now, of course, it's going to be an open standard, open framework. So other protocols may embed MPODs and use them, within their model, and that's fine. We're open source and we're happy with that. But certainly in our marketplace, where we intend to lead, obviously, the innovations in this space, crypto coins will be our primary token for enabling that.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, the next slide, I'm just going to skip through because our legal team have advised me that I shouldn't be using other brands' logos in it. But I will talk through it. And effectively, the other thing that we are doing with crypto coins is enabling brands to create branded versions of them. So we call these branded coins. And effectively, so brands can also give you end users branded coins to basically replace loyalty points and loyalty schemes. Now, importantly, from the end user's perspective, branded coins are at a baseline the same as crypto coins. So they can be exchanged in marketplaces for the value of a crypto coin, and they can be used like any crypto coin. But what brands can do is add additional brand benefits that encourage people to spend their branded coins within the brand's ecosystems. So it achieves loyalty, but the important thing is that it's always additional to the end user. A branded coin always gives the end user additional benefit to what a crypto coin would do, so they'll never lose the benefit of having a crypto coin, even if it's branded, but they may get additional incremental branded benefits.
Right. So this would work like a colored coin, like that kind of concept worked for
Exactly.
Bitcoin, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah, and for us, this is really key because if you look at the enterprise space, a lot of enterprises are experimenting with blockchain at the moment, but none of them know. Most are like, we don't touch crypto; it's bad, it's Silk Road, and blah blah blah.
Well, by the time this is implemented, they'll be using it and they won't really even know.
Exactly, because it addresses loyalty, which is a very low hanging fruit. They understand that. I think my philosophy is that you have to lead people from where they are, not where you want them to be. And loyalty is a space that's well understood. It has challenges with it, from in terms of its financial models and P&L structure, but by way of introducing branded coins, they can address a lot of those issues and start to play with the crypto economy, which is essentially a consumer movement now.
Right, right. So, do you mind if I give the people an example of?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's say you want to get let me say maybe a membership for a coffee place, right? And a
Yes.
coffee shop. So you will give various, or you don't have to, give various types of personal information, like as if you were doing it the old-fashioned way of writing your name down for a membership card. And
Yeah.
in response to that, you would get one of these branded coins, and you can use that for, I guess, whatever they intend it to be used for. Maybe redeeming a brownie or a latte or whatever, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
and it means that they can also then do much richer customer engagement. So when you go and buy your next coffee, they might ask you to share location information, or they might ask you to share how satisfied you were with that particular coffee, or they might ask you to, what list music are you listening to? It's endless. It means that brands can start to be really creative in terms of the information that they engage people around, and but there's a framework for rewarding people for sharing that information. And because there's a framework for rewarding people, you get into a kind of conversation around data sharing, and in many ways that's the next way for us to integrate chatbots and into this interface, so that it effectively becomes a conversation, and more data is shared and more value is realized in an equitable way through that exchange.
Right. Right. Okay.
So yeah, and I think as this slide really is about this marketplace,
Hmm.
that therefore that then comes around that, whereby we use AI and intelligence to match people, data owners, with service providers who make offers to people for MPODs. So in the simplest context, brands or businesses, and those could be, data processors and algos and startups and information. We call these refiners. You'll see that in a second. Make offers to people for MPODs in exchange for cryptos. It's very straightforward.
Right.
And then, so we're also forming a technology alliance. We call this Meta, which is basically a group to promote the MetaMart, to promote the MPOD protocol with businesses. And we're talking to a couple of very large technology companies at the moment, one of the large CRM companies at the moment, to join us. And they will help us in establishing the ethical data standard that we're developing in partnership with the BSI. So accelerating the actual formation of that into an ISO standard, but then also helping accelerate the adoption of the MPOD protocol and the use of the MetaMart for businesses to engage directly with consumers.
Right. Right. Just to kind of hit on that point for a lot of people, what they might not realize is the ISO standard. If a lot of companies want to have that kind of certificate in their headquarters or whatever to say that they're compliant with this standard, it's looks very good for them. Also from a regulatory perspective. So if that ever comes to fruition, which I think it's a definite possibility, it would be a gigantic thing. Again, it's like creating the communication protocols that we use for the internet, except those are a lot more simplistic and a lot more rudimentary than what is being offered here. Which it's I think it's hard for the average person to kind of visualize it, but it is something that is based off the internet, but offers a lot more functionality than those early day protocols. So it's it's very exciting stuff. It's internet changing type of stuff. Very, very big.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
So yeah, and MetaMe fundamentally, as I say, is like our DApp and we've built the front end of this already. We've built POCs for the blockchain backend, which we're integrating at the moment, and it fundamentally enables this brokering of offers between brands and businesses, and uses AI to filter out noise and only surface things that are relevant and interesting to people. Um, it also, at the moment it's one way, but the idea is that it becomes two way. So users are able to declare that they have an intent. So for example, a person might say, look, I've just bought a new car, I need car insurance, and therefore based on that intent, the MetaMe app will propose an MPod to them that would be you able to help them achieve that intent. And then that MPod will be made available to the MetaMart, probably anonymously initially, so that they can then get offers from insurers, people who provide them with insurers. And then when they select one of those, then a further MPod would be shared, which would have more information that would enable them to transact and then identify themselves accordingly.
Right. And the interesting thing that you're not really stating, obviously, and I'm not trying to you know say anything bad there, but
Please do.
um, is that that data can be shared with the organization that needs it. Let's say that insurance company, but anybody, let's say an attacker or anybody who is trying to use some sort of malevolent means to try to get your data, even if they got it, it would be encrypted because of the multiple layers of encryption by the metapods, that it wouldn't mean anything to them. It would be totally useless.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's completely secure, and only the entity who has permission to access it can access it, which can be contextual as well. Because we all know the worst thing in the world is, you go looking for car insurance one day, and then you're still getting spammed by them like 18 months later.
Hmm.
But with this, what you could do is make the data available to those entities during the period when you're looking for insurance. Once you've selected insurance and you're no longer in the market, the Metapod no longer is available to anyone but the insurer who you're engaged with. And so then it becomes encrypted, or it just appears as encrypted data to other entities going forward.
Right.
So we really need to clean up a lot of the noise of the web in through endpoints and how data is shared.
I love that.
So yeah, I mean the core components of the protocol are these, the MetaMe personal AI dApp, the MetaVault, which is where your MPods and your records are stored, records themselves, MPods, intents, which are effectively offers intents, and crypto coins. Um, and there is one of the things. So it's an interesting thing is that the transactional basis of MetaMe is something that some people love. Some people are like, well, I'm not really interested in selling my data, which I understand, and that's fine. But that's really only just a small. That's just one part of it. I think one of the things that is really important is that with with MetaMe, what you're able to do is to build up your own data vault, and therefore, and on top of that, you then create your own AI. And this for us is really important. What MetaMe really is an individualized, personalized AI that becomes your AI, that interface that it is the intermediary between you and these big enterprise AIs. So if I have my AI, which you can name whatever you want, that talks to Alexa. My AI talks to Siri and manages the information that Alexa or Siri or Cortana or Google have about me based on the service that they're delivering. And so even if you're not using MetaMe to trade your data and to provide it to businesses, to use it to collect your data and to build up your own personalized AI, we think is essential to being able to have a real seamless personal experience of the web going forward.
Right, right, and even those, it just allows you to take control of your privacy and what you have out on the internet as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of, our peers, and I always refer to our peers as peers and not competitors because I don't think that, and, based on this atomic approach that we have to data management, there's no one else approaching it like that, which on one hand means we're completely unique, but also more importantly, it means we're completely compatible with this entire ecosystem because we believe that Metapods would complement and improve the offerings of everyone listed here, and of course, much broader organizations, much more broadly beyond this.
Right.
Um, it fundamentally creates a new type of information class that can be used in civics. So we've been having conversations with Pillar, for example, around working with their Pillar wallet, and there's what the Pillar wallet is aiming to achieve is fantastic, and we're all sort of from the same church, if you will, and we're all kind of preaching the same gospel, as if you will, but our approach to it is at a different level in the operating system, a different level in the stack. But there's no reason why MPODs couldn't be distributed through the Pillar wallet. There's no reason why you couldn't use Civic to get KYC tokens and to store those in an MPOD and combine them with other information and use those to share with other people, with entities accordingly. There's no reason why we couldn't use UPort for key management. There's no reason why your attention from Brave or your back couldn't be used to share information with brands that are willing to pay you for that based on that insight. So, for us, a lot of people don't always think this way, but for us, we see, a rising tide raises all vessels, and certainly the work we're doing with the Ethical Data Standard and the BSI, where our intention would be that all of these organizations and the big sort of corporations out there all sort of collaborate together and join this.
Yeah, yeah. I see it pretty much the same way that the competitors would be more the traditional companies who attempted to do this but didn't really do it the right way and with the maybe the wrong intent, if that's the best way to say it. I don't know. But again, there's no reason for you to not be able to partner and assist each other with the same kind of goals. So, good stuff.
So team-wise, I mean, this slide's a little bit incomplete. So there's myself. I'm CEO and founder of MetaMe, CEO and chairman and founder of the Internet Foundation. Also, what I hadn't included on this slide was the rest of our management team. So we have Peter Bidewell, who's a lead blockchain consultant with Accenture, and he used to be CMO for Applied Blockchain. He's our marketing strategist. And we have Cheyenne Doswami, who's our technical architect, and he's also an IBMer who's worked on as an enterprise architect across the industrial sector, and worked on numerous enterprise-grade blockchain initiatives for IBM. So that's our sort of core management and operational team. And our advisory team is led by Derek Wyatt, who's an ex-MP and the founder of the Oxford Institute, a big internet think tank. He was head of the All-Party Comms Group from 94 to 2013, I believe, and he co-chairs it now. So he's been responsible for a lot of the internet policy that's been formulated in the UK. Phil Noble has been another pioneer on the use of the internet in social and political advancements across the US, and he's done work with the UN, the BBC, and the EU. And Hugo Drayton is our mentor, who's ex-MD of the Telegraph Group and CEO of InSkin Media, active in this space as well.
Okay. Very, very interesting. So, um, going from this, what is the status of the project now? Then, what's kind of the outlook for the next couple of months and that kind
Yeah,
of stuff?
absolutely.
Okay.
So I was just looking to see if there was a traction slide here.
Okay.
So effectively, we have we've I think it's I'll just get it back
No
here.
worries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have built out we've got an alpha product effectively,
Okay.
which is like a front end application with a simple blockchain backend. We built the blockchain backend separately and have around some POC work that we were doing within a mobility accelerator program. So we're integrating both of those together now, and we will. Our intention is to um, have a closed alpha release within the ICO framework.
Okay.
So we're planning to launch the ICO pre-sale in the next month or so. I don't want to kind of commit to the dates on air at the moment, but we're working towards um, launching the pre-sale within the next month or
Okay.
so. And then we will, and we're going to do a three-stage ICO. So a fiat pre-sale, then a fiat and crypto pre-sale, then a public sale. And after the closing of the public sale, we will release a closed beta version of the application, which will have a wallet integrated, and that's how crypto coins that have been bought within the ICO will be delivered to our subscribers or to our supporters in that regard.
Okay.
Uh, so early Q2 will be when we do the public sale of the ICO, and a couple of weeks after the completion of the public sale, we'll be releasing a beta version, which will have the full data vault, a couple limited APIs in terms of pulling in data from third-party sources. It will have a crypto wallet, which will have crypto coins that people have, and a few offers, probably um, POC offers that will initially be from the Internet Foundation or from Digitaria to buy MPods directly from people, which will enable us to do some research and bug fixing effectively. And then we'll do a version one release shortly thereafter, whereby we will then bring brands on board and open up the ecosystem to have more offers.
Okay. Well, the beta comes out right after the sale, so that's pretty quick turnaround time. I mean, I'm sure you guys have been working on that for a while. I think I recall seeing some of your work earlier, or I guess sorry, later from last year. So that's
Absolutely.
always good. I think people will really get a kick out of that because it's a from the if they're a contributor to the sale, it'll be like a quick turnaround time in their eyes. Like, oh, I just contributed to this, and then they have a product out already. Um,
Exactly.
so that's always good. I really like it. So, um,
I think that's
okay.
yeah, no, that's very exciting. And I think you're right. I think that it's crypto timescales, right? And you have
Yeah.
to be very fast in the market now. And the advantage we have is that we have been incubating and developing the front end and the application in the background for a while. So I think we'll be able to. We've learned a lot. We've run some POC tests and pilots with a couple of big enterprises, and we're also discussing with a couple of entities whom we can work with on pilot offers just to make it a bit more compelling. But yeah, the alpha product will be relatively straightforward.
Hmm.
There are a couple of enhancements to the UX and UI that we want to do just to make it a little bit more intuitive and easy to use. And yeah, I think that people will be quite excited when they see it.
Great, great. So, are there places that people can reach out to you guys and ask questions if they're interested in the project, or how would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So social channels will be going live very shortly. The metame.xyz is going to be our primary URL, but that's not live yet. In the short term, the easiest way to contact us is through Digitaria. So you can send info@digitaria.com,
Okay.
and any inquiries we'll answer there, or people can reach me directly, dele@digitaria.com. And we'll be opening the Slack channel and the Telegraph channels very shortly. So we're just polishing off the white paper now, and we'll be publishing that in a couple of days on metame.xyz, and we've got a few other URLs, but that with metame.xyz is probably going to be our core one, and yeah, people will publish all the social channels, Telegraph, Slack, etc., on that in the next couple of days too.
Okay. Sounds great. So, Dele, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you are super busy because I just know sort of what your work schedule is, but it looks like you guys have a fantastic idea and very innovative and ambitious idea and are well on your way. So I'd like to thank you for joining, and you're welcome here anytime. If you want to talk about your project or anything, just let me know.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. It's been great fun talking, and I'm looking forward to talking again soon.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Thanks.